Timyn Rice, and he leads the FWC Fish and Wildlife Research Institute's oil spill program and serves as the state scientific support coordinator for pollution response. He has 20 plus years of response experience with DEP emergency response, where he also developed the environmental forensics program in support of environmental crimes investigations. He led the multi-agency environmental response team in the aftermath of 9/11 and served as the state on-scene coordinator for Sector St. Petersburg Unified Command during Deepwater Horizon oil spill. Timyn has an undergraduate degree in environmental science from Eckerd and master's degree in environmental health from the University of South Florida. So,
Hello, guy. Well, welcome to the Fish and Wildlife Research Institute. Thank you for coming. As a state scientific support coordinator for pollution response, this workshop is really relevant. So I hope that we all, get something out of it. What I would like to try to cover today is just a brief overview of our oil spill support program, and then talk specifically about how environmental sensitivity index mapping can help connect researchers and responders together. That's kind of the theme here. And then if I have time, I'd like to talk about a practical application for some of that mapping, ESI mapping, and other data sets towards the response for Hurricane Michael. So that might be a lot to cover in 20 minutes. Monica, you can just get the hook when my time is up. So here we are at, you are here at the Research Institute, and we have satellite offices around the whole state. We have about 400 scientists that work on all various aspects of fish, wildlife, and habitats. So obviously they're not all working on oil spill response, but it is a deep bench for reach back support for us. So a little bit about our oil spill support program. So FWC is a state trustee for fish, wildlife, and natural resources. So we feel like we have an important role in oil spill response. And here are a few things that we do bring to the table in oil spill response. And oh, how come I can't see that slide on my screen? Okay, we'll just go off of the main screen then. We bring a state scientific support coordinator and other experts into the incident command at spills and drills. We can provide resources at risk for incidents in the state of Florida. We also can deploy our Florida Marine Spill Analysis System, a GIS system, in support of spills and drills. We maintain the Wildlife Contingency Plan for oil spill response, and that's developed in conjunction with our other state and federal partners. We developed the environmental sensitivity index data for the state, and I'm going to go into that in more detail in a minute. We are active members of all the area committees, and Brad mentioned area committees. I just will second the motion that that's an excellent place for our researchers and responders to meet in advance of a spill incident. So those are typically held, on a quarterly or semi-annual basis in each one of the U.S. Coast Guard sectors in Florida. And we assist with natural resource damage assessments and also restoration projects throughout the state. So let's talk a little bit about ESI mapping. Technically, these are called sensitivity of coastal environments and wildlife to spilled oil. That's a bit of a mouthful, so we'll just go with ESI mapping, but they are available as map atlases and as GIS geodatabases. So I'm going to go through, just kind of define ESI mapping and start with a little bit of ESI 101 here. ESI maps summarize three main components: shoreline types and their sensitivity to oil, biological resources, and human use features. So I'll just talk really briefly about each one of those. This is normally about probably a 2-hour presentation. I'm going to do it in 4 slides. So the first component is shoreline habitat. That's the real part of the index. That's the actual environmental sensitivity index part of the whole data set. And so shorelines are indexed from 1 to 10, with 1 being least sensitive to oil, for example, a vertical exposed seawall, and 10 being the most sensitive to oil, for example, a mangrove shoreline, which is very sensitive to oil, very difficult to clean up, and can take a very long time to recover. You can see on this slide that a beach is a relatively low on that scale. It's a 3. People might think, oh, beaches are important. Well, they are if we can direct oil to a beach, we might want to do that because it's relatively easy to clean up oil on a beach, and they do recover quickly as compared to some of these other shoreline habitats. The second component in the ESI data set is biological resources. And we focus on threatened and endangered species, commercially and recreationally important species, species that are in a high concentration in certain areas, and species that have sensitive life stages, such as nesting birds or juveniles. So on this map is actually of Pensacola Bay with Fort Pickens here. You'll see the threatened and endangered species are all highlighted with a red box around them. There are quite a few in that particular area. So let's just take a quick note of this blue polygon area and a fish with a number, again, I don't have this on my screen, so I think it's a 194. And there's a terrestrial mammal here with a 410. So on the back of the map, you have a lot of information. For biology, we map, I think, 8 different elements, sub-elements, and all the species within them. So for each species or element, you will see whether it's state or federally threatened, what the concentration of that species is, its seasonality, and its life stages. Okay, so let's look at that fish. 194 is a Gulf sturgeon. It's threatened both state and federally. There are about 2,000 to 3,000 individuals there. That's pretty specific information. They are present in March, April, October, and November as adults. Okay, so that's quite a bit of information that's on the back of the map and in our GIS data. The other species I think we were looking at was this terrestrial mammal. That's 410, Perdido Key beach mouse, endangered state and federally, and present throughout the year. Important information to know if you had an oil spill right at the mouth of Pensacola Bay. So the third category are the human use features, and this is where we map things like boat ramps, power plants, water intakes, archaeological sites, and importantly, we map all of the managed areas like aquatic preserves and wildlife refuges. And then on the back of the map there is information, contact information for all of those human use resources. So those were the 3 main components of the ESI data set. And so here's an example of how we might use that ESI data set. So this is kind of a screenshot from our Florida Marine Spill Analysis System. If we had a spill here at the mouth of Tampa Bay, we're able to run a query through all of those resources at risk and come up with a list of species and human use features and shoreline types that Unified Command or the environmental unit might need to know about. Where does all the information come from? It comes from researchers and scientists at all these different agencies. Okay, who uses it? Responders. So that's where we have that connection between research and response. So this shows the current status of our ESI updates around the state of Florida. We have 5 ESI regions. We are currently working on the East Florida region. Last time it was updated was 1996. So a lot has changed in 23 years. We have a lot of, there's shoreline changes, there's development, and there's a lot of new information from scientists about fish and wildlife and habitats over in the East Coast area. So we're doing that. Ryan Dreher is working with me on it, developing the human use stuff on it. But RPI is our contractor on that, and I can tell you that we would really like to have these all updated on a 5-year cycle, but we're limited by funding, like most folks. The typical cost to update one region is around $400,000, and right now FWC is bearing all of the cost of that without any assistance from the Coast Guard or NOAA. So we're always looking for opportunities for more funding and partnerships with that. Right. So I have some time to talk about a practical application for Hurricane Michael, which kind of roared through the Panhandle back in October of last year. It caused a great deal of damage throughout the area, and one of the areas of damage that it did, it displaced a lot of vessels throughout the area. This is just one small part of the response, and it's called ESF 10 because that stands for Emergency Support Function 10 is for hazardous materials. It's just one kind of FEMA designated support function out of many. So FWC and the Coast Guard were tasked under a mission assignment to deal with all these vessels, and we kind of considered them, this is a hazardous materials mission, so we considered each one of these vessels a mini oil spill because they contain oil, batteries, and other hazmat. And some of them were leaking, and some of them were discharging, and some of them were just potential. But there were boats all over the place, and a lot in marinas and a lot out in sensitive areas. One of the first things that we did in conjunction with our NOAA SSC was put together our best management practices for how we were going to deal with all of these vessels, what species were threatened and endangered, what kind of habitats were out there. And as long as we could kind of comply with these best management practices, we didn't require any additional permitting. It was important at first to kind of figure out the scope of our job, though. So we used aerial imagery that was taken shortly after the hurricane, and RPI analyzed that imagery and identified all of the displaced vessels within our area of operation. And there were, I don't have my notes in front of me, but about 1,320, I'm going to say, initial targets out there, which was kind of a lot, right? So what we had to kind of reduce that down a little bit. So we took out all the vessels that weren't within our jurisdiction. And our jurisdiction is state waters. So if the vessel wasn't in state waters, if it was 100 yards up on private property, fortunately, it was not covered under the mission. If it was on federal lands, like Tyndall Air Force Base, it was not covered under the mission. Then we sent out field teams to go out and validate the targets and find out if they were still there, if they had been removed maybe by their owners, or whether or not an insurance company was going to remove them. So that brought down our entire target list to about 500 vessels, right? That's a little bit more manageable for us. We wanted to find out which of those vessels were in sensitive sites where they would require a little bit of additional attention from the environmental unit and possibly a resource advisor on scene. So we looked at all these different criteria, and these are all kind of ESI related. ESI 10 shorelines, salt marsh, seagrasses, and then all of our managed lands throughout the area. And we started to overlay that on the map. So the blue diamonds are all your vessels, and all this red area is ESI 10 shorelines. So anything that fell on an ESI 10 shoreline got a star. We overlaid our seagrass polygons. So any of those targets that fell within a seagrass polygon, they got tagged. So you guys get the idea, right? Then we overlaid critical habitats. This critical habitat was for Gulf sturgeon, piping plover, and we had a couple of endangered beach mice species out there as well. And then we overlaid all the managed lands. This is an aquatic preserve. So in the end, everything that fell within one of those categories got a star on it. Okay, there's one that just didn't kind of get in down there. It wasn't in any of those areas. But out of those 500 targets, there were about 220 that we considered in sensitive sites. So a little bit less than half. Pretty manageable for us. We leveraged some current technology, including Survey 123 and ARC Collector. We provided the information to our field teams. So this is a screenshot of what you would see if you're with Coast Guard or with FWC or a contractor out on scene. And if you were going to go and remove this target, you would automatically get an electronic environmental consultation that would tell you, I think there's some information here, call the park manager 48 hours in advance. And then there were advisories. This is in a critical habitat. Beware of beach mice, you know, or you're in a seagrass area, don't damage the bottom. And then the field team would have to acknowledge that. So there was a checkbox where they would acknowledge that they got that environmental unit consultation. Here's another example with a couple of vessels that are within an ESI 10 shoreline. And so they got an advisory here that this is on a sensitive shoreline, avoid impacts to shoreline and benthic habitat, and acknowledge, check, right? So this was really useful. The people in the field really liked it. They could turn on and off the layers and really get a good idea of what kinds of sensitive environments that they were working in. So here's a few pictures of some sensitive sites. Got a vessel over here. Our contractor is working with a crane. Just a note on all of these removals, we always had an FWC officer and a Coast Guard person at a minimum on them, okay? This is a recovery operation, a removal operation in Apalachicola. I just like this slide because it shows this asset that we brought in. It's a twin turbine powered air barge that we could use to get into these salt marsh areas without causing too much impact other than noise. And it was a heavy hauler. We could put boats right up onto the deck of that and get them out. Here's us operating in some severely shallow water, but you can see we could pull that boat right up on the deck and remove it from the area. This vessel, originally we thought was not in our jurisdiction. We didn't think it was in state waters. We went out and spoke with the park manager, and he pointed out that it was in a freshwater creek. So, that's state water. So, okay, we can remove this boat. But he didn't want us to drag it out to the water. He didn't want us to drag it toward the road and damage the wetland area. So we had to bring in some specialized equipment. And you can see here this crane. It's a long reach crane. We're removing the mast from the vessel. And then we were able to pick the vessel straight up and put it on a trailer on the road without causing any additional harm. And then I'm going to show you a couple of quick slides. How am I doing, Monica? One more minute. All right. So this was one of our final and largest targets. This was a 147-foot old casino boat that was stranded in Panama City Bay in some very shallow seagrass area. This kind of gives you perspective on how shallow it was and the size of the vessel. This picture shows where we had to take it, drag it out on roller bags about 1,000 feet into deeper water where we could parbuckler. We had the FSU campus over here, and there's a US 98 bridge nearby. This kind of shows the methodology that we used. This barge was spudded down and ballasted onto the bottom. It had two 300-ton diesel winches on it. So there we had floating Dyneema lines that attached to the bow of the vessel. The vessel was up on roller bags, and we had a support barge behind it, and it was just a matter of slowly rolling it out. It took us a few days to do it, but we did it successfully without too much damage to the seafloor. This video is a little bit of video. This shows where the vessel initially was grounded, pretty big hole. See these sand piles right here? We didn't realize initially is that the boat was full of about 250 tons of sand, which made it weigh almost 450 tons. And it was burning up our winches when we were trying to pull it. So we had to pump that sand out of the boat, and it did cover some seagrass. That was part of our remediation project afterwards. You can also see it's actually being pulled right now. There's a little bit of turbidity coming out, and that's just from the weight of the vessel on the roller bags and on the seafloor. Most of the damage that we incurred from the response was a little bit of scarring and some spud holes. This is a picture of our divers filling up spud holes with sand so that it was so that it wouldn't scour out and that we could recruit new seagrass to fill in that area. This is a little bit of video that shows the other part of the remediation project. These are those sand piles I was telling you about. We have divers in the water with 3-inch trash pumps that are basically pumping that sand back into the hole that it came out of and re-exposing the seagrass that had been covered by the sand piles. And here's a video. It took our divers a little time to get the hang of doing this, but once they got the hang of it, they were able to really pull that sand right off, expose the seagrass blades, and not dive down into the rhizomes and the roots very far. So we think that'll recover pretty well. And we did deliver the vessel to Bay County. It will become a artificial reef in about 100 feet of water, 12 miles offshore. It'll be a great place for diving and fishing in the future. So it was successful. It involved some science, and I think we're going to wait for questions until we have a panel discussion. Thank you.